This little gadget is the new Quick Reader for the Insta360 Go 3 and Go 3S cameras. What can it do? How well does it perform? And is it worth buying? Stay tuned and let's try to find out. When I did my review of the original Go 3, I identified several negatives or weaknesses about the Go 3, which included things like the inability to charge the camera without the action pod, the inability to transfer files from the camera without the action pod, the lack of flexibility by having a fixed memory versus using a memory card, and also the very slow file transfer speed because it uses USB 2.0. Now, my hope was that the successor to the Go 3 would solve all or most of these problems by having a USB port directly on the camera itself, and perhaps even a memory card slot. Now, of course, these would need to be placed behind a waterproof door, but this is something we've seen on various other Insta360 cameras already, and doing so obviously would add a little bit of weight and size to the camera itself, but personally I think that's a reasonable sacrifice for the added functionality of at least a USB-C port. And as I'm sure you're aware, the successor is now here, the Go 3S, and of course it does not have a USB-C port or a memory card slot. But Insta360 opted to go a different direction by introducing the Quick Reader, which promises, at least on paper, to solve a lot of these problems, including charging the camera, transferring files off the camera, even transferring files to a memory card. So today we're going to be putting the Quick Reader through its paces to see how well it performs those various tasks and also how it compares to using the action pod. So there's a lot to cover, so as usual I'm going to place the chapters up here and on the video timeline, but before we get into it, just to emphasize, this video is not sponsored, paid for, or influenced in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money and the opinions are entirely my own. If you enjoy the video and get good information out of it, please remember to give us a like and also consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more content. So let's get on with it. So let's take a closer look at the Quick Reader. So as you can see, it is very similar in size to the actual camera module itself, although it is a little bit longer and wider, but it is also not quite as thick as the camera, and as you just saw, it magnetically snaps onto the camera very easily. It weighs in at just 19 grams, which compares to about 96 grams for the action pod, which makes it very portable. Obviously it's very small and light and can be easily carried around in a pocket. On the front we have the same 6-pin connector as you will find on the action pod, which obviously connects to the contacts on the back of the camera. It snaps in place magnetically, as you saw. There is no locking mechanism, but the hold is pretty firm, as you can see. On the back of the Quick Reader you'll find there are two different connectors. For previous generation iPhones you have a lightning connector, and for pretty much everything else you have a USB-C connector. There is a single button on the side here, and its only purpose is it holds this connector in place to help you plug it in without it recessing back into the device. On the USB-C connector end there is a card slot for a micro SD card, and we'll talk more about the function of that later on, of course. So prior to the release of the Quick Reader, the only way to charge your Go 3 or Go 3S was by placing it inside the action pod, and this would allow you to charge the camera from the battery in the action pod or plug the action pod into AC power by way of the USB-C port. and in both cases Insta360 says that you can charge the camera in about 35 minutes, and in my own testing I confirmed that you could charge the camera up in around about 32 to 33 minutes, regardless of whether from the Action Pod's battery or from AC power. So now with the release of the Quick Reader, there is another way of charging the camera. So in order to use this as a charger, we simply plug the USB-C port into a power bank or an AC adapter, and you can also charge the camera by plugging it into the USB-C port on your Windows or Mac computer. As far as charging performance is concerned, it works exactly the same way as the Action Pod, charging up the camera from empty to full in around about 32 to 33 minutes. Now, one important thing to mention about the Quick Reader is that although it will charge the camera, it will not power the camera when it is recording. So for example, if I plug into a power source and I attach the camera, you'll notice that within a few seconds the light on the camera turns green. That means it is connected with the new Quick Reader and it is in file transfer mode. It is not possible to record with the camera when it is connected to the Quick Reader. So overall, when it comes to charging, the Quick Reader does offer you some additional options over and above the Action Pod. Of course, it's much smaller than the Action Pod, but keep in mind that in order to be able to use it, you're going to have at least a small power bank or AC adapter, or borrow one from somebody in order to use it to charge the camera. And of course, unlike the Action Pod, which can charge the camera from its own battery, this needs to be plugged into some kind of power supply. So, as I said, it does offer you some additional charging possibilities, but frankly, I still would have preferred a USB-C port on the camera itself. Okay, let's talk about file transfer. Now, when it comes to file transfer, there are three different scenarios that we're going to cover here. Firstly, transferring to your smartphone or tablet using the Insta360 app. Secondly, transferring to a desktop or laptop computer. And thirdly, transferring to a memory card. So first up, let's talk about transferring to your smartphone or tablet using the Insta360 app. Now, prior to the Quick Reader, the only way to do this, of course, was by using a wireless connection. So to create the connection, we would simply open up the app, connect to the camera and connect to its Wi-Fi, and this would give us full access to the camera, including, of course, remote control of the camera, but also access to all of the files on the camera. Having accessed the files on the camera, you can edit them, of course, while they're still on the camera, or you can download them to your device. Now, in general, I would recommend downloading them. First of all, it allows you to free up space on the camera, and secondly, keep in mind that as long as you are connected, you're using Wi-Fi on the camera, which drains the battery much faster. So now, using the new Quick Reader, I can do this with a direct connection. Now, I have an older iPhone, so I'm going to be using the Lightning adapter. You can see when I plug it in, it asks me if I want to enable this device. For some reason, it does this every time. Now, I take the camera, which is already powered on, and I place it onto the reader, and within a few seconds, the light will turn green, showing you that it is connected. Now, I should point out that when you are connected through the Quick Reader, that is not intended for operating the camera. You can see if I click the button here, it tells me I have to connect wirelessly if I want to control the camera for recording. However, if I go into the album, you can see that I have access to all the files on the camera, and I can edit them and download them in exactly the same way as I could using the wireless connection. Now, connecting the camera to the app using the Quick Reader has two key advantages over the wireless connection. Number one is transfer speed. Now, I did some testing, and with the wireless connection, I was getting about 20 to 22 megabytes per second on the transfer speed. When I use the Quick Reader, I'm getting about 30 megabytes per second. So obviously it will take you less time to do the transfer, but also because it's taking less time, it will use less of the camera's battery to do that. And talking of power, that is the second advantage. Using Wi-Fi is a considerable drain on the battery of the camera, so having the direct connection will also be less of a drain on the camera. A couple of other points to mention when it comes to connecting the camera through the Quick Reader to the app. Firstly, that there is no charging taking place. So as long as this is connected, it's still draining the camera's battery, but it's obviously draining it at a lower rate than if you had the Wi-Fi enabled. And one final point, and you may have already noticed this, if you have any kind of case, even a very low profile case such as the one I have on here, it prevents the lightning connector in this case from making a good connection. So I actually have to peel mine back a little bit in order to plug it in. So if you have a larger case, and in particular a larger case that's very difficult to get on and off, this might not be the best option. So once again, prior to the release of the Quick Reader, the only way to transfer the files to a computer would be by way of the action pod. So you place the camera in the action pod and then you connect up the USB-C port to your computer, power on the camera, and then hit the UDisc mode, after which the camera would appear just like any other drive on your computer. You can access the files on it, you can play the videos, you can copy, move items, delete items, whatever you want. And so now with the Quick Reader you have an additional option. You just power the camera on, place it into the Quick Reader and plug it into the USB-C port. And this will give you exactly the same capabilities as using the action pod. Now, using the Quick Reader does give you a very slight speed advantage. In my testing, I saw speeds of around about 30 megabytes per second when using the Action Pod and about 36 megabytes per second when using the Quick Reader. So yes, it is slightly faster, but when you compare that to 4K capable memory cards which have transfer speeds approaching 200 megabytes per second, it's pretty slow. One final thing to mention in this section, when you are connected to your Windows or Mac computer by USB-C, whether using the Action Pod or the Quick Reader, it will also be charging that device. If you're connected to the Quick Reader, of course, that means it's charging the camera, and if you're connected via the Action Pod, the computer will be charging the Action Pod, which in turn charges the camera. So the third and final file transfer mode that we want to talk about is transferring files to a memory card. Now for me, this has the potential for being probably the best feature of the Quick Reader, and the reason I say has the potential is because it actually currently has an issue that I'll talk about in just a few minutes. So once again, prior to the release of the Quick Reader, the only way to transfer files from the camera to the memory card would be by way of a computer, but frankly I don't know why anybody would want to do that. The main purpose for having this feature is when you really don't have access to a computer or other device to be able to offload files onto. Let's say you are on vacation, you're on a trip, you're out in the field filming, and you're concerned that the memory of the camera is getting a little bit too full, and you would like to have the ability to offload files. And that's where the Quick Reader comes in. So the Quick Reader also has a micro SD card slot, so I can place a memory card in here, I can attach the camera, plug it into a power source, and then I can transfer all the contents of the camera onto the memory card. Now there are two different ways of doing this. Firstly, you can connect the Quick Reader to the Action Pod and use the Action Pod's menu to initiate the transfer. This also gives you the advantage of having a basic status display of the transfer. Or you can activate the transfer from the camera itself simply by plugging the Quick Reader into a power source, powering the camera on, and hitting a single button. Now, there are a couple of important things to know about the memory card transfer function. Firstly, this is a full sweep. There is no means of selecting which files are transferred and which ones are not. When you hit that button, regardless of using the Action Pod or the standalone camera, all of the files that are currently on the camera will be moved over to the memory card. And secondly, this is a move function and not a copy function. So again, once you initiate that transfer, all of the files will be removed from the camera and they will be on the memory card and no longer available on the camera itself. Now, as far as the speed of transfer is concerned, once again, this is fairly slow. I clocked it at around about 38 megabytes per second. So my advice would definitely be not to wait until the camera gets close to being full before you do this. For example, if you have the 128 gigabyte version and you let it get to the point of being close to full and you initiate the transfer, you're going to have to wait the best part of an hour for that transfer to take place. And finally, but most importantly in this section, there is currently an issue with the memory transfer function. In short, when you make a transfer, the date and time stamp of your original recording is overwritten and replaced with the date and time of the transfer. Now, if you want more detail on this, check out my video where I highlight this specific issue. I have reported the issue to Insta360 technical support. The issue was escalated and they have responded to me indicating that they are looking into the problem, and hopefully this is something that can be fixed with a firmware update in the near future. So what is the verdict on the new Insta360 Quick Reader? So first off, it certainly is a pretty cool and innovative solution, and it's pretty impressive how much functionality they've packed into this tiny little device. And I also have to give credit to Insta360 for making this backwards compatible also for the Go 3. Now, when it comes to the question, is it worth buying? I guess it's going to depend on exactly how you typically work with your Go 3S or your Go 3. The Quick Reader definitely gives you some new options when it comes to charging the camera or transferring files off the camera. The question is, will you be able to take advantage of those? If you typically always have the action pod with you, then I'm not sure you're going to get that much benefit from the Quick Reader. Yes, it does offer a small benefit in some of the transfer speeds, but these are really not that significant. On the other hand, if you want to be able to travel light and ditch the action pod, the Quick Reader might just be the solution you've been looking for. But do keep in mind that when it comes to charging the camera, the Quick Reader cannot do it by itself. You're going to need some form of power supply, whether you carry it with you or borrow it from somebody else. Now, as I said earlier, for me, one of the biggest features of the Quick Reader is the ability to transfer files to a micro SD card. But as we also discussed, there is an issue right now with that functionality. So for me, this is not something I plan to use until this is fixed, and hopefully that will be within the near future. Also, I do have to say that I'm a little disappointed in the continued use of USB 2.0 and the very slow transfer speeds. Hopefully this is also something that can be addressed with an update of this product. And finally, even though this is a very clever and cool and very functional product, I still think it would have been better to just simply put a USB port on the camera itself. Hopefully that's something Insta360 can consider for the next generation. So that wraps it up for another video. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, remember to give us a like. Consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. If you have any questions, any comments, if you have suggestions for future videos, please drop those into the comments section. I love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you again for watching.